Next slide, please. So as I mentioned earlier, I think the state and federal funding has been very important, for our efforts, not only city efforts, but Supervisor Bartlett worked with us. I think there was just over $500,000 of CARES Act money allocated to Laguna Beach businesses and nonprofits. She did a great job putting that program together, processing it through quickly, $10,000 grants to a number of our businesses and nonprofits. Assemblywoman Petrie Norris, as I said earlier, has been extraordinarily important, assisting us in our communications with the state and with the governor's office. She also obviously was key in putting together the state budget, along with Senator Morlock, that protected our school funding throughout the state, which again I think was critical. And I know they continue to work and look for ways to help our local governments survive in this really, frankly, very difficult time. And of course, all the credit to Harley Ruda, our congressman. He was there. He voted on the CARES Act funding that came through to the state and then eventually down to the county and eventually down to the city. So I know he's pushing hard. We've been in constant communication with his office. I know he's pushing hard for further assistance for another round of funding, and we're all looking forward to that being successful. You'll hear a little bit later about some of our financial issues from our city manager, and not just Laguna, but I think all, the state and local governments are going to need additional assistance from the federal government to really get through this crisis. Next slide, please. So making the promenade permanent, we're looking ahead. We voted a couple weeks ago to extend it through January 2021. And we directed staff to assess the permanent, the road to making it a permanent improvement. What would we have to do if we were going to do that? We'll be getting a report back in January on that. So stay tuned. I know many of you in the chamber with businesses in town have been very supportive of that. A number of residents have been supportive of it. I think it's been a great addition to our community, and we'll see if we can figure out a way to make it permanent as we look at that option in January. Next slide, please. We also have a Parklets program. This is Harley Restaurant, no relationship to our congressman, but the first one that's up, the city has allocated $5,000 to any restaurant. We'll grant you $5,000 to assist in the construction of a parklet. I know we've got a number of them that are in process as well. Our assistant city manager, Sheree Dupuy, worked with Laguna Construction to come up with a standardized design, which I think looks great, and came in just under the $5,000 amount. So thank you to Laguna Construction for partnering with us on that. I think it's going to look great, and hopefully we'll see more of them popping up around town, not just in the downtown, but down in the Hip District, and hopefully throughout town. Next slide, please. So we've all been reading about wildfires, constantly the last several weeks. The air throughout the state has been, impacted on an unprecedented level. I'm proud to say that we as a city have been working for really several years on our wildfire mitigation and preparedness program. Last July, the council approved a wildfire mitigation report and fire safety report, 47 recommendations. You can see some of the ones we're engaged in here. Installing an outdoor warning system with 24 locations. We've got about half of them installed already. We're working on an evacuation model. I think we've all read and seen about that. Myself and the city manager and a number of others took a trip to Paradise after that devastating fire up there, and we saw, what can happen to a community if you're not, if you're in the path of a out of control wildfire, and it's sobering to say the least. So we've been working on an evacuation model to better get people out in an emergency, expanding our fuel modification zones. I have to again thank Assemblywoman Petrie Norris, $1 million grant from the state last year to help us expand fuel modification. And we've dedicated that to some expansion in South Laguna around the hospital. We're updating our emergency evacuation plans, and we're working on special considerations in light of COVID-19. Next slide, please. Another part of the wildfire mitigation fire safety plan is doing some utility undergrounding to make sure that we do have safe evacuation routes. You'll see there on September 22nd next week, we're scheduled to approve the formation of 2 of those. One, Bluebird Canyon, which is a box canyon. As we know, there's only one way out. I think it'll be hugely beneficial to that neighborhood to get those underground, those utilities. And then there are remaining utilities on PCH, which is one of our, we only have 3 ways in and out, as we all know, and that's PCH is 2 of them, one north, one south. So we're looking to approve an undergrounding district there. We've acquired $10 million worth of what are called Rule 20A credits from the Southern California Edison that basically allows us to cut the cost of undergrounding in half. So it's been a good move for the city. Next slide, please. Well, record low crime rate, and Chief Farinella, I think she's still on the call, will be retiring and leaving us, and we're all extraordinarily sad about that. I think everybody on the call knows that her 5 years here in the city have been hugely beneficial to us as a community, and you can see here some of the statistics. We're very proud of our police department and the work that they do. I think it's outstanding. Handling 6 million visitors a year. It's not just a little sleep.
Employees and all the employee associations to address these issues and recommend prudent actions to the City Council, who supported them in a very timely manner, and I'm very appreciative of that. So just reminding everyone, going back to April, on April 7th, we had our first round of budget reductions. This was 3 weeks after we closed City Hall. So we reduced the citywide budget by about $12.5 million. We reduced the general fund by about $6.5 million. And as part of those efforts, we had to add $500,000 to public safety to deal with beach closures, trailhead closures, downtown businesses, masks, other issues, because we knew public safety was going to be critical to helping the community get through the pandemic. We challenged our city department heads to work with their employees to immediately tighten their belts and save $2.5 million by the end of the year, which they did, and I'm very appreciative of. We received a little bit of good luck in that our revenues were a little better than expected. Now I need to clarify that. That's better than expected after we cut $12.5 million out of the budget. That's not better than the original revenues that we started the fiscal year with. One of the benefits of saving the money and having revenues come in a little better than expected is that we don't believe we're going to have to tap into the city's 20% general fund reserve after we close the books on this fiscal year. We're going to be giving the City Council a more detailed update on September 22nd, but we believe we're heading into this current fiscal year being able to preserve our original general fund reserve, and this should be very helpful to help us get through what is likely to be a multi-year recovery. So this next slide is a slide that was shared with the City Council on June 23rd during our budget workshop. And we wanted to be candid with the council and with the community, and we presented 2 scenarios. One was a bad scenario and the other was worse, and there was simply no other way to say it. Under the bad scenario, we were looking at a citywide loss of $18 million. Under the worst scenario, over $24 million. In our general fund, and this is the fund that provides our public safety services, police, fire, marine safety, public works, recreation, planning, public, and capital, the staff to work on a lot of the public works projects. So in this fund, we were looking at a loss of $9.4 million, about 13%, but it could be worse, going up to almost 13 million or 18% of our general fund. And keep in mind, that's at the same time minimizing the impact of public safety, which is about 53% of the city's general fund budget. So we looked at what the stay-at-home order was going to be. Again, this was June. In the bad scenario, we thought it would be through early summer, which has turned out to be generally the case. However, there still could be a second wave at stay-at-home orders. We hope not. We think people are wearing their masks. They're following protocols. We hope that there will not be a second wave. But again, back in June, these are some of the situations that we're looking at. It's a very difficult environment to predict the revenues and expenditures going forward. So under the bad scenario, we're looking at a recession through most of this fiscal year, through June 30th of 2021. However, it could still be worse, and there could be a severe recession. Our reductions under the bad scenario for TOT and sales tax was 30 to 45%. Under the worst scenario, 60 to 70%. Under the bad scenario, we would have slow growth in use of hotels and restaurants, which we have been seeing recently. Under the worst scenario, there would have been extremely limited capacity at hotels and restaurants throughout the year. Under the bad scenario, we're hoping that use of our general fund reserves and some prudent budgeting will allow us to sustain most services until the economy recovers. If things get worse, we could rapidly deplete our reserves, requiring reductions in core services such as public safety. I'm pleased to say at this point that we're trending more toward the bad scenario, but we are still very concerned about the upcoming winter, about the flu season, about when there will be a vaccine, about how quickly the economy will recover, about the level of confidence that Americans will have to returning to public life. So we need to continue, as the mayor said, continue to wear our masks, continue to follow our protocols, continue to be as safe as we possibly can to help ourselves, help each other, and help our economy. Because it is still possible that things could trend toward the worst, requiring additional reductions in city services. Next slide. So then the city council redid, we typically have a budget that spans a 2 fiscal year period. Given the crisis that was facing the community economically, we redid the second year of the budget between April 7th and the middle of June. And this was a Herculean effort by all of the city staff, but I have to call out Gavin Curran, our Director of Administrative Services, who worked many days on end to pull this together with the city team. And I can't thank you enough, Gavin. Great job. So on June 23rd, we had a budget workshop with recommendations that were ultimately adopted by the city council on June 30th. As part of the budget that the council adopted, we reduced expenditures by $18 million citywide and $9.4 million in the general fund. One of the issues we face looking forward is that the revenues that the city receives and the data tends to lag behind the actual performance. So for example, the summer quarter from hotel tax revenues, we will not know until November. So we anecdotally speak to hotel operators to visit Laguna. We see that occupancies are better, but as we head into the fall, there are not likely going to be the huge holiday parties that a lot of companies typically hold, conventions, conferences. Those things are still going to be likely on hold for most companies. And that is going to impact our hotel industry during the winter months. Similarly, sales taxes, we will not have actual data until this January. And although some of our restaurants have been working well with the Promenade, with the Parklets, with outdoor seating, it is certainly not like a normal year for them, and that is going to impact the city. So we're going to have to continue to monitor our revenues and our expenditures and make prompt adjustments if we need to. As I said earlier, we are trending at the moment toward the better of the two scenarios, toward the bad scenario. That's good, but we are still a long ways from coming out of this. And even when we do come out of it, I expect there's going to be a slow recovery to the economy, that we're going to need to continue to manage our budget. We have some reserves that can help us maintain services, but we're going to have to continue to work through this and work together. So we are hopeful that with the slightly better results we are seeing from closing last year's books, we may be able to take that money and set it aside instead of using our reserve. So we'll be recommending that to the City Council on September 22nd. That may give us as a community some additional breathing room as we move forward to work through what is likely going to be some type of a recession. So maintaining our reserves for the longer term is really essential to our ability to service the community. Again, I want to thank all of our employees and our employee associations. Many of our employees voluntarily gave up raises